As I stood in our living room, watching Richard pace, a sense of dread washed over me. This was the morning we were supposed to embark on our 30th anniversary trip, a journey that promised to rekindle the flame in our marriage that had been flickering out over the years. But Richard, my husband of 3 decades, was a picture of anxiety and distance, not the excited partner I had expected. "Richard, is everything okay? You seem preoccupied," I asked, my voice laced with concern. It was unlike him to be so distracted, especially today. He stopped pacing and turned to me. His eyes, once a source of warmth and comfort, now evaded mine as if hiding a painful secret. "Elaine, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice devoid of its usual tenderness. "I can't make the trip. Something urgent has come up at work, and I need to handle it." The words hit me like a cold wave. "On our anniversary? Can it wait?" I couldn't mask the disappointment in my voice. This trip was more than just a vacation. It was supposed to be a new beginning for us. Richard's response was curt, a sharp contrast to his normally considerate demeanor. "Business doesn't wait. You know how it is," he said almost mechanically. "But we've been planning this for months, Richard. Can it be postponed?" I pressed on, hoping for some indication that he shared my disappointment. "It's not negotiable, Elaine." His tone was firm, leaving no room for discussion. "I expect you to understand." Understand? How could I? I watched in silence as Richard hurriedly grabbed a few essentials and left, the door closing with a finality that felt symbolic. The man who had promised to grow old with me was now a stranger, his actions shrouded in mystery. Once alone, my mind raced with confusion and suspicion. This wasn't like the Richard I knew. The man who once couldn't wait to spend time with me now seemed to find any excuse to be away. Determined to unearth the truth, I went to our bedroom and started searching through his things. It was unlike me to pry, but the gnawing doubt left me no choice. Then, amidst his neatly folded shirts and socks, I found it, a small, crumpled receipt from a high-end jewelry store. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, revealing an expensive purchase made just a week ago. A necklace, luxurious and elegant, and certainly not for me. I hadn't received a gift from Richard in years. My heart raced as I pieced together the painful puzzle. Richard was having an affair. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Betrayal, anger, sadness. I realized I couldn't let this pass unchecked. Richard had to answer for his deceit, and I was going to make sure of it. The trip might have been canceled, but my journey to confront the truth and demand accountability from the man I thought I knew had just begun. The house felt eerily silent after Richard left. I sat at the dining table, the crumpled receipt from the jewelry store in front of me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was not the first sign of Richard's infidelity, but merely the latest in a series of subtle changes I had been too naive to acknowledge. I thought back to the late nights he claimed were spent at work, the sudden weekend meetings, and the decreasing number of calls he made to check in on me. Each memory was a piece of a jigsaw puzzle I had refused to complete until now. Armed with a resolve hardened by betrayal, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't confront Richard without solid proof. I needed to know more, to understand the extent of his deception. My first step was to call the jewelry store. Disguising my voice, I inquired about the necklace on the receipt. The salesperson, eager to help, confirmed that the piece was indeed purchased by Richard, and he had mentioned it was a gift for someone special. My heart sank at those words. Next, I turned to Richard's phone records. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but the trust that once held our marriage together had already been shattered. Scrolling through his call history, I saw numerous calls to a number I didn't recognize, often late at night or early in the morning. I jotted it down, my mind racing with anger and hurt. The following day, I followed Richard. I felt like a character in a cheap detective novel, but desperation drove me. I watched from a distance as he met with a young woman, half his age, at a cafe. They laughed and talked with a familiarity that twisted the knife in my heart. I took photos as proof, each snapshot a testament to his betrayal. That evening, when Richard returned home, acting as if nothing was amiss, I confronted him. "Richard, who is she?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "Who are you talking about, Elaine?" Don't play dumb, Richard, the woman you were with today, the one you bought the necklace for. I threw the photos on the table in front of him. Richard's face went pale, but he quickly regained his composure. Elaine, you're being paranoid. She's just a colleague from work. A colleague? I scoffed. I'm not a fool, Richard. I've seen the way you two are together. It's clear you're having an affair. Richard's expression hardened. You've been spying on me? Invading my privacy? Yes, I have. Because you've been lying to me. How long has this been going on, Richard? He averted his gaze, his silence confirming my suspicions. Rage and disappointment battled within me. This was the man I had built a life with, and he was treating our marriage like it was nothing. I want the truth, Richard. I deserve that much, I said, my voice breaking. Richard finally met my gaze, his eyes cold and detached. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing her. It started a few months ago. Happy now? His words were like daggers, each one piercing through the remnants of the trust and love I had for him. I felt a surge of anger, but beneath it there was an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could you do this to us, Richard, to me? My voice trembled, barely containing the hurt. Was our marriage, our life together, just a joke to you? Richard sighed, a mixture of frustration and indifference. It's not that simple, Elaine. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged, fighting back tears. Make me understand why you threw away 30 years for a fling. He shrugged, his nonchalance fueling my anger. Things change, Elaine. People change. What we had, it's not the same anymore. I stared at him, incredulous. This was not the man I married, not the partner I had loved and trusted. He was a stranger wearing Richard's face. Is that all I get? A cliché? No remorse, no apology? I asked, my voice rising. Richard remained silent, his lack of response speaking volumes. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The man before me was not the one I had vowed to spend my life with. He had chosen his path, and it was time for me to choose mine. I want a divorce, Richard, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Richard looked at me, finally showing a flicker of emotion. You're serious? More than I've ever been. I can't be with someone who has so little respect for me for what we built together. My decision was firm, born out of pain and betrayal, but also out of a newfound strength. Richard didn't argue. He knew as well as I did that there was no going back from this. That night, I lay in bed, the weight of my decision heavy on my heart. I had lost the man I loved, but in the process, I had found a part of myself that I didn't know existed. A part that was strong, resilient, and ready to face a new beginning. The morning after confronting Richard about his affair, I woke up feeling like I was in the middle of a nightmare. The comfort of our bedroom now felt like a hollow shell of the life we had built together. I sat up, knowing that today was not just another day. It was the day I would start taking control of my life. As I made coffee, the silence of the house was deafening. Richard had spent the night in the guest room, a symbolic distance that spoke louder than words. I knew I had to plan my next steps carefully. It wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about reclaiming my dignity. When Richard finally emerged, he looked like a man defeated, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a sullen resignation. Elaine, about yesterday, he began, his voice trailing off. What about it, Richard? You admitted to your affair. What more is there to say? I cut him off, not interested in any excuses he might have. I never intended to hurt you, he said, looking down at his feet. I laughed, a bitter, scornful laugh. You didn't intend to hurt me? What did you think would happen, Richard? Did you think I'd never find out? Or did you just not care? He didn't answer, and in his silence, I found my resolve strengthening. You know what, Richard? It doesn't matter. Your intentions don't change what you did. I want a divorce, and I want it as soon as possible. Richard finally looked at me, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Elaine, please, let's talk about this. We can go to counseling. We can try to work this out. Counseling? Now you want to try? It's too late for that, Richard. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I could see the realization dawning on him that I was serious. For years I had put his needs before mine, forgiving his shortcomings and overlooking his flaws. But not anymore. Elaine, I'm sorry, he finally muttered. Sorry doesn't change what you did. It doesn't erase the betrayal, I said, my voice steady, even though inside I was crumbling. I spent the day consulting a lawyer and making plans for my future. I was determined to not let Richard's actions define the rest of my life. I would start fresh, no matter how daunting that seemed. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized that despite the pain and betrayal, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was taking charge of my destiny, no longer a passive player in Richard's deceitful game. For years, I had clung to the hope that our love would prevail, that we would overcome any obstacle. But now I saw the truth. Our marriage was a facade, one that Richard had shattered with his infidelity. As I stared at the ceiling, lost in my thoughts, the door creaked open. Richard stood there, a mix of defiance and desperation in his eyes. "Elaine, we need to talk about how we're going to handle this. The divorce, I mean." I sat up, steeling myself. "Handle it? You'll hear from my lawyer. That's how we'll handle it." "Elaine, be reasonable. Think about what you're doing. We can sort this out without lawyers, without making it messy," he pleaded. "Reasonable?" I echoed, incredulous. "You cheat on me, lie to me, and now you want me to be reasonable?" "It's beyond that, Richard. You made it messy the moment you decided to betray our vows." He took a step forward, his hands reaching out as if to find some connection, some remnant of the love we once shared. "I know I messed up, but we've been together for 30 years. That has to count for something." "It did count for something, Richard. It counted for everything, until you threw it away. 30 years, and you decided that wasn't enough," I said, my voice laced with a mix of sorrow and indignation. Richard's face fell, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "So that's it then? You're just going to throw away everything we had?" "Throw away? No, Richard, you threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied, my resolve unwavering. He stood there for a moment as if waiting for me to change my mind, to offer some glimmer of hope, but there was none left to give. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he turned and left the room. Lying in the dark, I realized the enormity of the path ahead. The divorce would be just the beginning. There would be challenges, heartaches, and moments of doubt, but there would also be freedom, a chance to rediscover who I was before Richard, before the lies and betrayal. As I drifted off to sleep, a single thought echoed in my mind. I would not only survive this, I would emerge stronger, forged by the fire of betrayal, and tempered by the resolve to never again be anyone's victim. The days following my decision to divorce Richard were a whirlwind of activity. I met with my lawyer, discussing the best strategy to ensure I came out of this marriage with what I deserved. The hurt from Richard's betrayal still lingered, but it was now accompanied by a burning desire for retribution. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some financial documents, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, hidden amongst bank statements and bills, were receipts and documents for a luxury apartment, one that Richard had rented in the city. Rage boiled within me as I realized that this was where he had been taking her, his mistress. This wasn't just a fleeting affair. He had invested time, money, and effort into this deception. I knew then that my retribution needed to be more than just emotional. It needed to hit Richard where it hurt him the most, his pride and his wallet. With meticulous planning, I began my campaign. I reached out to some mutual friends and subtly revealed Richard's infidelity. I watched as the news spread, tarnishing the reputation he had so carefully built. The man who prided himself on his status in our social circles was now the subject of pity and disdain. But I didn't stop there. I made sure that every detail of our divorce proceedings highlighted his infidelity and financial duplicity. My lawyer, skilled in unraveling complex marital finances, ensured that Richard's hidden assets were brought to light. During one particularly tense meeting, Richard sat across from me, his face a mask of controlled anger. "You're dragging my name through the mud, Elaine. Is this really necessary?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Necessary? Richard, you made a mockery of our marriage. This is the consequence of your actions." He clenched his jaw, his hands forming tight fists. "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure of it." His threat was meant to intimidate me, but I had grown immune to his manipulations. Regret? The only thing I regret is not seeing who you truly were sooner. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Richard's true nature became increasingly evident. He tried to hide assets, dodge alimony payments, and smear my character. But each attempt only strengthened my resolve to see this through, to ensure he faced the consequences of his betrayal. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had won a significant portion of our shared assets, and Richard was ordered to pay a substantial amount in alimony. But more than the financial victory, it was the knowledge that I had stood up to him, that I had not let his betrayal define me, that felt like my greatest triumph. As I walked out of the courtroom, I knew that this was just the beginning of my new life. A life where I was no longer bound to a man who had shown me nothing but deceit. A life where I could finally start to heal and move forward. With the divorce finalized, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new chapter in my life. The sense of liberation was overwhelming, yet daunting. For the first time in years, my future was mine to shape, free from Richard's deceitful shadow. As I began to rebuild my life, I realized that the marriage had taken more from me than I had admitted. My interests, passions, and friendships had been sidelined in my efforts to be the perfect wife to Richard. Now it was time to rediscover Elaine Thompson, the woman before the wife. I started by reconnecting with old friends, many of whom I had lost touch with during my marriage. As I shared my story, I found a network of support and understanding. Their indignation at Richard's actions and their admiration for my strength in facing him gave me a sense of vindication. One evening, over dinner with a group of close friends, the conversation inevitably turned to Richard and the aftermath of our divorce. "Elaine, you really showed him," exclaimed my friend Marissa, her eyes sparkling with a mix of amusement and respect. "He thought he could get away with it, but you turned the tables beautifully." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't let him think he could betray me without consequences. "And the way you exposed his financial secrets. That was brilliant," added another friend, David. "He really underestimated you." Their words bolstered my resolve. I had not only stood up to Richard, but had also exposed him for who he truly was. The community's perception of him had shifted drastically, and he was no longer the respected figure he once was. However, the path to rebuilding my life wasn't just about settling scores with Richard. It was also about finding myself again. I enrolled in art classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. Each stroke of the brush on the canvas was therapeutic, a way of expressing the emotions I had bottled up for years. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. It was during these moments of giving back that I felt a true sense of fulfillment, a stark contrast to the hollow life I had lived with Richard. Yet, Richard's shadow still lingered. One afternoon, as I was leaving the art studio, my phone rang. It was Richard. I hesitated for a moment before answering, curious about what he could possibly have to say. "Elaine, we need to talk." Richard's voice came through, a hint of desperation in his tone. "Talk? About what, Richard? The divorce is final. There's nothing left to discuss," I replied, my guard up. "It's not about the divorce. I'm in a bit of a situation," he said, his voice faltering. I paused, a part of me feeling a twinge of curiosity. "What kind of situation?" I've made some bad investments. I'm in financial trouble, Elaine." "Serious trouble," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't help but feel a sense of ironic justice. Richard, who had always prided himself on his financial acumen, now found himself in the pit he had dug for himself. "Richard, your financial issues are no longer my concern. You made your bed," I responded, my voice firm. I know, but I was hoping maybe you could help me out, just temporarily," he pleaded. The audacity of his request took me aback. After everything he had put me through, he had the gall to ask for my help. "Help you? After you cheated, lied, and tried to hide your assets during the divorce? You must be joking," I said, incredulity lacing my words. "I'm serious, Elaine. I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent. I might lose everything," he pressed. "Richard, you lost everything the moment you decided to betray our marriage. I suggest you find another way to solve your problems," I said, ending the call. As I put the phone down, a sense of empowerment washed over me. The Richard who had once controlled and manipulated me was now at the mercy of his own poor decisions. I had moved on, building a life filled with new passions, friends, and a sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, and I knew there would be challenges. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, the architect of my own destiny. Richard was a chapter closed, a painful lesson learned, but also the catalyst for my transformation into a stronger, more independent version of myself. In the months following our divorce, Richard's life seemed to unravel at the seams. The once respected businessman was now a shadow of his former self, his poor choices catching up to him. I heard snippets of his misfortunes through mutual acquaintances, each story a testament to his rapidly declining situation. One day I received an unexpected visit from Richard. He stood at my doorstep, a man defeated. His clothes were disheveled, a far cry from the meticulously dressed Richard Ward once knew. "Elaine, I need to talk to you. It's important," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated, but eventually led him into the living room. His presence in the house we once shared felt invasive, a reminder of a painful past. "What is it, Richard? I thought we had nothing left to say to each other," I said, my arms crossed. It's about the money I owe," he started, unable to meet my eyes. "I've been drowning in debt. The investments I made, they've gone south. I'm on the brink of bankruptcy." I listened, feeling a mix of vindication and pity. Richard, who had always prided himself on his financial prowess, was now crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. "Elaine, I was wondering if you could lend me some money. Just enough to get back on my feet," he pleaded. The request left me speechless. After everything he had done, he still had the audacity to ask for my help. "Richard, you must be out of your mind. Why would I help you after you betrayed me, after you tried to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine?" I said, the bitterness evident in my voice. "I know I've made mistakes, Elaine, terrible ones, but I'm desperate. I have nowhere else to turn," he said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "Your mistakes were your own doing, Richard. You chose to betray our marriage, to lie, to deceive. You chose to live beyond your means, chasing after a life filled with greed and infidelity. It's not my responsibility to save you from the consequences of your actions," I replied, my resolve firm. Richard's face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation. "So that's it? You're just going to watch me fall?" "You didn't seem to have any qualms watching our marriage fall apart. You made your choices, Richard. Now you have to live with them," I said, standing my ground. He looked around the room, a room that once symbolized our life together, now a symbol of his downfall. "I never thought it would come to this. I thought I could handle everything." "Thinking you could handle everything was your biggest mistake. You overestimated yourself, and now you're paying the price," I said, the finality in my voice signaling the end of our conversation. Richard stood up, a broken man. As he walked to the door, he turned to me one last time. "I really did love you, Elaine, in my own way. I wish I could believe that, Richard. But love doesn't destroy, doesn't deceive. What you had for me wasn't love." "Goodbye, Richard," I said, closing the door behind him. As I watched him walk away, a part of me felt sorry for the man he had become. But I knew that any sympathy for Richard was misplaced. He was the architect of his own downfall, a man who let his ego and desires lead him down a path of destruction. In that moment, I realized that my journey was not just about overcoming Richard's betrayal. It was about rising above it.